The microphone felt cold against my trembling fingers as 300 faces stared back at me from the auditorium. I had practiced this valedictorian speech 1,000 times in my bedroom mirror. But standing here under the harsh stage lights, every word I had memorized seemed to dissolve like sugar in rain. Fellow graduates, I began, my voice barely a whisper that the microphone amplified into an embarrassing squeak. A few snickers rippled through the crowd. Today marks not just the end of our high school journey, but the beginning of Speak Up, Mouse. Someone shouted from the back rows, and the nickname that had followed me through for years of high school hit like a physical blow. More laughter erupted, spreading like wildfire through the sea of graduation caps. Even some parents were smiling, as if my humiliation was part of the entertainment. I gripped the podium tighter, my knuckles white against the dark wood. The principal, Mrs. Henderson, gave me an encouraging nod from the side of the stage, but her eyes held that familiar mixture of pity and impatience I had grown to recognize. The same look teachers gave me when I sat alone at lunch, when no one picked me for group projects, when I walked the hallways like a ghost in my own life. As I was saying, I continued, my voice gaining a fraction of strength. We stand here today because of the lessons we've learned, not just from textbooks, but from each other. We've learned about friendship, about loyalty, about being a loser. The voice belonged to Derek Matthews, captain of the football team, and his words sent another wave of cruel laughter through the audience. I could see him in the third row, his Letterman jacket gleaming under the lights, surrounded by his usual crowd of admirers. They were all laughing now, these people who had made my life a careful navigation of avoided eye contact and silent hallways. My prepared speech about overcoming challenges and reaching for dreams suddenly felt like a joke. What did I know about overcoming anything? I was Sarah Chen, the girl who ate lunch in the library, who had never been invited to a single party, who had spent prom night reorganizing her college application essays while everyone else danced. I was the girl whose greatest achievement was academic excellence in a world that valued everything else. The laughter was dying down now, replaced by restless, shifting, and whispered conversations. I could feel the moment slipping away, my one chance to say something meaningful, reduced to a spectacle of social awkwardness. In the front row, I spotted my parents, their faces tight with secondhand embarrassment and protective anger. My mother's hands were clenched in her lap, and I knew she was fighting the urge to march onto that stage and defend her daughter. But then, in the midst of my humiliation, something shifted inside me. Maybe it was the sight of my parents' pain, or maybe it was the accumulated weight of 4 years of being invisible. But I felt a strange calm settle over my shoulders like a familiar coat. "You know what?" I said, and this time my voice carried clearly through the microphone without trembling. "You're right to laugh." The auditorium fell quiet, confusion replacing mockery. Even Derek Matthews stopped his whispered commentary to his friends. "You're right to laugh because I am different. I am the girl who spent Friday nights studying instead of partying. I am the girl who chose books over popularity, who chose grades over gossip. I am the girl who believed that intelligence and kindness mattered more than social status." I paused, letting my words settle over the suddenly silent crowd. "And for 4 years, you made me feel ashamed of that." The silence was complete now, heavy and expectant. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of traffic outside, the rapid beating of my own heart. "But I'm not ashamed anymore," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "Because while you were busy laughing at me, I was busy becoming someone worth knowing. While you were busy tearing others down, I was busy building myself up. And while you were busy being cruel, I was busy learning what real strength looks like." I could see faces in the audience beginning to change. The easy mockery replaced by something more complex. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious, a few even ashamed. My parents were sitting straighter now, pride beginning to replace their earlier distress. "But this speech isn't really about me," I said, and I felt my voice catch slightly. "It's about someone who never got the chance to give her own graduation speech. Someone who never got to walk across this stage and receive her diploma. Someone who never got to prove that being different, being kind, being vulnerable in a cruel world is actually the bravest thing you can do. The auditorium was so quiet now that I could hear my own breathing amplified through the speakers. 300 people waited, and for the first time in my high school career, they were truly listening to me. "Her name," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but carrying perfectly in the absolute silence, "was Emma Rodriguez." And then something extraordinary happened. In the third row, a girl named Jessica slowly stood up. I recognized her as one of Emma's friends from the art club, someone who had always been kind but quiet. Then another student stood, and another. Like a wave moving through the auditorium, students began rising from their seats, their faces solemn and respectful. Even Derek Matthews stood, his earlier smirk replaced by something that looked almost like shame. Teachers stood, parents stood. Within moments, the entire auditorium was on its feet, in silent tribute to a girl who had been gone for 8 months. A girl whose absence had left a hole in our class that we had all tried to pretend didn't exist. I stood there at the podium, looking out at 300 people standing in honor of Emma, and felt the weight of what I was about to say. This wasn't just my graduation speech anymore. This was my chance to tell Emma's story, to make sure her voice was heard in the silence she had left behind. The standing ovation continued, but it wasn't for me. It was for her, for the girl who had been too gentle for this harsh world, too sensitive for the casual cruelty that we had all participated in or ignored. It was an acknowledgement, finally, of what we had lost and what we had failed to protect. As I looked out at the sea of standing figures, I realized that this moment, this unexpected unity in grief and recognition, was more powerful than any prepared speech about future dreams and past achievements. This was real. This was honest. This was the truth we had all been avoiding. And in that silence, with 300 people standing in tribute to a girl who would never graduate, I knew that the rest of my speech would be the most important words I would ever speak. The standing ovation seemed to last forever. But when it finally ended and everyone slowly took their seats, the silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't the restless, mocking quiet of an audience waiting to be entertained. It was the heavy, respectful silence of people who suddenly understood they were about to hear something that mattered. I stood at the podium, my prepared note cards forgotten, and let that silence stretch between us like a bridge I was afraid to cross. Emma's name hung in the air, and I could feel the weight of it settling over everyone in the auditorium. Some students were looking down at their hands now, others staring directly at me with expressions I had never seen before. Tension mixed with something that might have been guilt. "Emma Rodriguez," I repeated, and my voice was steadier now, as if speaking her name had given me strength instead of taking it away. "How many of you remember her?" A few hands went up hesitantly, then more, until nearly half the graduating class had their hands raised. But I could see the uncertainty in their faces, the way they glanced at each other as if seeking permission to remember. "She sat in the back corner of Mrs. Patterson's English class," I continued, my eyes finding that exact spot in the auditorium where our English teacher sat with the other faculty. Mrs. Patterson's face had gone pale, and I could see her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them in her lap. She always had paint under her fingernails from art class. She wore the same faded denim jacket every day, the one with the small tear near the left elbow that she never bothered to fix. I paused, watching as recognition dawned on more faces. Emma had been invisible to most of them, but she hadn't been invisible to me. We had shared the particular loneliness of being outsiders, though we had never really talked about it. We had exchanged small smiles in hallways, sat near each other in classes where no one else wanted us as partners, existed in parallel orbits of quiet solitude. "She loved sunflowers," I said, and I could hear my voice growing softer, more intimate, as if I were telling a bedtime story instead of giving a graduation speech. "She painted them constantly on canvas, in the margins of her notebooks. Even on the bathroom walls, when she thought no one was looking, Mrs. Chen, in the art department, probably still has dozens of Emma's sunflower paintings stored in the supply closet. In the audience, I could see Mrs. Chen nodding, tears beginning to form in her eyes. She was one of the few teachers who had really seen Emma, who had encouraged her art and treated her with the gentle respect she deserved. Emma was quiet, but she wasn't weak, I continued. And now I was speaking directly to Derek Matthews and his crowd, to all the students who had mistaken kindness for weakness, sensitivity for vulnerability to be exploited. She was quiet because she was listening, she was watching, she was feeling everything more deeply than the rest of us, and that takes a kind of courage that most people never develop. The auditorium remained perfectly still, but I could sense the shift happening in the collective consciousness of my classmates. They were remembering now not just Emma's presence, but their own behavior toward her. The casual exclusions, the ignored attempts at friendship, the way they had looked through her as if she were made of glass. She tried to join things, I said, my voice taking on a harder edge. She tried out for the school play sophomore year. She auditioned for the talent show. She volunteered to help with the homecoming decorations. And every time she was politely turned away or simply ignored until she stopped trying. I could see some students shifting uncomfortably in their seats now. Sarah Martinez, who had been in charge of homecoming decorations, was staring at her hands. Tom Bradley, who directed the school plays, had his jaw clenched tight. They remembered now. They all remembered. She ate lunch alone every day for 4 years, I continued. And my voice was barely above a whisper now, but the microphone carried every word to the farthest corners of the auditorium. She sat at the table by the window in the cafeteria, the one everyone avoided because it was too close to where the teachers sat. She would read while she ate or sketch in her notebook, and she would look up sometimes when groups of friends walked by. And you could see in her eyes that she was hoping someone might stop, might ask her to join them. The silence was becoming unbearable now, heavy with collective guilt and recognition. I could see parents in the audience looking at their own children with new questions in their eyes. What kind of people had they raised? What kind of school had they sent their children to? But no one ever stopped, I said, and the words fell like stones into still water. No one ever asked. And slowly, over 4 years, Emma stopped looking up when people walked by. She stopped hoping. She stopped believing that she mattered to anyone. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what I was about to say next. This was the part I had never told anyone, the part that had been eating at me for 8 months. The reason I was standing here, destroying my carefully planned speech and replacing it with this painful truth. The last time I saw Emma alive, I said, and my voice cracked slightly on the word alive, was in the parking lot after school on a Tuesday in October. She was sitting in her car and she was crying. I was walking to my own car and I saw her and I paused, swallowing hard. I almost stopped. I almost walked over and asked if she was okay. I almost did the thing that no one had done for either of us. In 4 years, I almost reached out. The confession hung in the air like smoke, and I could feel the audience holding its breath. But I didn't, I whispered. I was afraid. Afraid that if I talked to her, people would see us together and think we were both losers. Afraid that her sadness was contagious. Afraid that helping her would somehow make my own loneliness more visible. Tears were flowing freely down my cheeks now, but I didn't wipe them away. This was the truth Emma deserved, the honest accounting of how we had all failed her. So I got in my car and I drove home, and I told myself that she would be fine, that tomorrow would be better, that someone else would help her. My voice was breaking now, but I forced myself to continue. 3 days later, Emma Rodriguez took her own life. The words hit the auditorium like a physical blow. I could hear sharp intakes of breath, a few muffled sobs. The sound of someone's chair scraping against the floor as they shifted in shock or discomfort. She left a note, I said, my voice barely audible now. Her parents shared it with the school counselors, who shared it with the principal, who shared it with a few teachers. It was short. Just 3 sentences. I paused, gathering the strength to speak words that had haunted me for months. I tried to matter. I tried to belong. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to keep trying. The silence that followed was absolute and devastating. 300 people sat in the weight of that revelation, in the understanding of what their indifference had cost, what their casual cruelty had destroyed. And in that silence, I realized that everything was about to change. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating, until I heard the first sob break through. It came from somewhere in the middle of the auditorium, a sharp, involuntary sound of grief that seemed to unlock something in everyone else. Suddenly, the careful composure of a graduation ceremony crumbled, and I could see tears on faces throughout the crowd. But I wasn't finished. I couldn't be finished. Not when I had come this far, not when Emma's story was finally being heard. After Emma died, I continued, my voice growing stronger. Despite the tears still flowing down my cheeks, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that moment in the parking lot, about how close I had come to doing something, anything, that might have changed everything. So I started asking questions. I could see Mrs. Henderson, the principal, shifting nervously in her seat at the side of the stage. This wasn't part of any approved graduation speech, and I could tell she was debating whether to intervene. But something in the absolute attention of the audience, the way 300 people were hanging on every word, seemed to stay her hand. I talked to Emma's art teacher, Mrs. Chen. I talked to the librarian, Mrs. Foster, who had noticed Emma spending more and more time alone in the stacks. I talked to the guidance counselor, Mr. Peterson, who had seen Emma exactly twice in 4 years, both times because she was required to discuss her course schedule. Each name I mentioned seemed to hit like an accusation. I could see the adults in question, their faces pale with the recognition of their own failures, their own missed opportunities to see what was happening right in front of them. But the most important conversation I had, I said, pausing to let the words settle, was with Emma's mother. A ripple of surprise went through the audience. Students glanced at each other, wondering how I had managed to speak with Mrs. Rodriguez, wondering what she could have told me that would matter now. Mrs. Rodriguez invited me to their house 3 months ago, I continued. She said she had been hoping someone from school would reach out, someone who might have known Emma, who might be able to help her understand what had happened to her daughter. I could picture that afternoon clearly sitting in Emma's childhood bedroom, surrounded by canvases covered in sunflowers, while her mother shared stories I had never heard and showed me things I had never seen. Emma kept a journal, I said, and I could feel the audience lean forward slightly, sensing that this was important, that this was where the real revelation lay. She wrote in it every day for 4 years. Her mother gave me permission to read it, hoping it might help me understand. Might help all of us understand. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. It was worn and faded, filled with Emma's careful handwriting and small sketches in the margins. The sight of it seemed to electrify the audience, this tangible piece of the girl they had ignored. The physical evidence of an inner life they had never bothered to discover. Emma wrote about all of you, I said, holding the journal carefully as if it were made of glass. She wrote about Derek Matthews. Derek's head snapped up, his face suddenly pale. His friends around him had gone quiet, the easy camaraderie of moments before replaced by tense uncertainty. October 15th, junior year, I read, opening the journal to a page I had marked with a small piece of paper. Derek Matthews smiled at me in the hallway today. Just a quick smile when we passed by the lockers, but it was real. I smiled back, and for a moment I thought maybe he was going to say something. But then his friends caught up with him, and he looked away. I know it doesn't mean anything, but it was nice to feel visible for just a second. Derek's face had gone from pale to red, and I could see him struggling with emotions he clearly wasn't used to processing in public. Around him, his friends were staring, perhaps seeing him differently than they ever had before. She wrote about Sarah Martinez, I continued, flipping to another marked page. November 3rd, senior year. Sarah Martinez asked if I wanted to help with the homecoming decorations. I was so excited I could barely speak. But when I showed up to the gym after school, she looked surprised to see me, like she had forgotten. She asked, She gave me a box of streamers to hang, but she put me in the corner where no one would see my work. I stayed for 2 hours, but no one talked to me except to ask where I had put the tape. I left early and told them I had to get home for dinner. Sarah said thanks, but she didn't look at me when she said it. Sarah Martinez was crying now, her hands pressed to her face as if she could hide from her own actions. I could see her mother in the audience reaching over to put a comforting hand on her father's arm, both of them clearly struggling with this new understanding of their daughter's behavior. She wrote about the teachers too, I said, my voice taking on a harder edge. About Mr. Peterson, the guidance counselor who was supposed to help students like Emma. Mr. Peterson had gone rigid in his seat, his face a mask of professional composure that couldn't quite hide his growing panic. January 12th, senior year, I read, I finally worked up the courage to talk to Mr. Peterson about college applications. I thought maybe he could help me figure out how to write about myself in the essays, how to make myself sound interesting when I've never done anything worth mentioning. But when I went to his office, he barely looked up from his computer. He handed me a stack of generic applications and told me to fill them out if I was serious about college. When I tried to ask questions, he kept checking his watch. I left after 10 minutes feeling smaller than when I went in. The indictment was devastating in its quiet simplicity. Mr. Peterson, whose job it was to guide and support students, had failed in the most basic way possible. He had treated a cry for help as an administrative inconvenience. But the entry that changed everything for me, I said, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper, was from the day before she died. The auditorium went completely silent again, the kind of silence that felt almost sacred. Even the air conditioning seemed too quiet, as if the building itself was holding its breath. October 20th, senior year, I read, and my voice was shaking now. I've been thinking about what it would be like if I wasn't here anymore. Not in a scary way, just wondering if anyone would notice. I made a list of people who might miss me, and I could only think of 3. Mom, Dad, and maybe Mrs. Chen from art class. That's not enough people to justify taking up space in the world. I could hear crying throughout the auditorium now, but I forced myself to continue. But then I thought about the valedictorian speech at graduation. Sarah Chen will probably give she's the smartest person in our class, even if no one talks to her either. I wonder what she'll say. I wonder if she'll talk about how we're all connected, how we all matter, how we've all made a difference in each other's lives. I wonder if she knows that's not true for everyone. I wonder if she knows that some of us will graduate without ever really being seen. The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I had read them dozens of times before. Emma had thought about me, had wondered about my speech, had hoped that maybe I would say something that acknowledged people like us, people like her. I wish I could tell her, I continued reading, my voice breaking completely now, that she's not as alone as she thinks she is. I wish I could tell her that I see her too, that I know what it's like to be smart and kind and completely invisible. I wish we could have been friends. I think we would have understood each other. I closed the journal and looked out at the audience. At 300 faces that were finally, truly seeing me, finally understanding what their indifference had cost. Emma Rodriguez wanted to be my friend, I said. And the words came out like a confession, like a prayer, like an accusation all at once. She saw me when no one else did, and I was too afraid, too selfish, too concerned with my own survival to see her back. The silence that followed was different from all the others. It wasn't expectant or uncomfortable or even respectful. It was the silence of people confronting their own failures, their own capacity for cruelty through indifference. And in that silence, I realized that Emma's story wasn't finished. There was more to tell, more that needed to be said before this moment could end. Before these people could go back to their lives and try to forget what they had learned, there was still the question of what we were going to do about it. I stood at the podium, Emma's journal still in my hands, and looked out at an auditorium full of people who were finally, truly listening. The tears on their faces weren't just grief anymore, they were recognition, shame, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. Emma's mother asked me to do something. I said, my voice steady now, despite the magnitude of what I was about to reveal. She asked me to make sure that Emma's death meant something, that it changed something, that it prevented other students from feeling as invisible and worthless as her daughter had felt. I could see Mrs. Henderson at the edge of the stage, her face tight with concern. This was far beyond anything she had expected from a valedictorian speech, and I could tell she was calculating whether to intervene. But the absolute attention of the audience, the way parents and students alike were hanging on every word, seemed to paralyze her with indecision. So I spent the last 3 months investigating. I continued, and I could feel the shift in the room, the way people straightened in their seats as they realized this wasn't just a memorial anymore. This was an expose. I talked to students, teachers, administrators. I requested records under the Freedom of Information Act. I documented everything. I reached into my other pocket and pulled out a thick folder of papers. The sight of it sent a visible ripple of unease through the faculty section, and I could see several teachers exchanging worried glances. "Did you know?" I said, opening the folder, "that in the past 4 years, 17 students at our school have attempted suicide. 17. And that's just the ones that were reported to the administration." The number hit the audience like a slap. Parents gasped, students looked around at each other with new eyes, wondering who among them had been suffering in silence. "Did you know that our school's guidance counselor, Mr. Peterson, has a caseload of over 400 students? That's more than double the recommended ratio. Did you know that he's required to spend 60% of his time on administrative tasks and standardized testing coordination, leaving less than 2 days a week for actual counseling?" Mr. Peterson's face had gone from red to gray, but I could see something else in his expression: relief that someone was finally acknowledging the impossible situation he had been placed in. The way the system had set him up to fail students like Emma. "Did you know?" I continued, my voice growing stronger, "that our school has cut funding for arts programs by 40% in the past 3 years? Emma's art class, the one place where she felt valued and seen, was scheduled to be eliminated next year due to budget constraints." Mrs. Chen was crying openly now, but she was also nodding, her face a mixture of grief and vindication. She had fought for her program, had tried to explain to administrators that for some students, art class wasn't just an elective, it was a lifeline. "Did you know that our school's anti-bullying policy hasn't been updated since 2018? That it doesn't address social exclusion, deliberate isolation, or the kind of systematic indifference that can destroy a person just as effectively as physical violence?" I could see some students shifting uncomfortably, recognizing their own behavior in my words. But I could also see others nodding, students who had been victims of exactly the kind of subtle cruelty I was describing. "But here's what I found that shocked me the most," I said, pulling out a specific document from my folder. 3 weeks before Emma died, she submitted a request to start a support group for students who felt isolated or excluded. She wanted to call it the Sunflower Society, a place where kids who didn't fit in anywhere else could find each other, could realize they weren't alone. The auditorium was completely silent now, the kind of silence that felt like the world holding its breath. "Her request was denied," I said, and my voice carried clearly to every corner of the room. Not because it was a bad idea, not because there wasn't a need for it, but because there was no faculty member available to supervise it, no room in the budget for supplies, no space in the schedule for meetings. I could see the principal's face now, and it was the face of someone who knew they were about to be held accountable for decisions they had made in conference rooms far removed from the daily reality of student life. "Emma Rodriguez died because she believed she didn't matter," I said, and my voice was like steel now, cutting through every excuse and rationalization. "But she was wrong. She did matter. She mattered so much that her death has revealed everything that's broken about how we treat each other, how we structure our schools, how we define success and failure." I closed the folder and set it on the podium, then picked up Emma's journal again. Emma wrote something else in her final entry. I said, "Something her mother didn't share with the school. Something she saved for me." I opened to the very last page where Emma's handwriting was shakier, more desperate, but still heartbreakingly hopeful. If someone is reading this after I'm gone, I want them to know that I don't blame anyone. I know that everyone is fighting their own battles, dealing with their own pain, but I also want them to know that small kindnesses matter more than people realize. A smile in the hallway, an invitation to sit together at lunch, a simple "how are you" can save someone's life. I wish I had been brave enough to offer those kindnesses to others, instead of just hoping someone would offer them to me. The words hung in the air like a benediction. A final gift from a girl who had found compassion even in her darkest moment. Emma Rodriguez was braver than any of us, I said, looking directly at Derek Matthews, at Sarah Martinez, at all the students who had spent 4 years believing that popularity and social status were measures of courage. She was brave enough to keep trying when everyone ignored her. She was brave enough to keep hoping when hope seemed pointless. She was brave enough to care about others, even when no one seemed to care about her. I could see Derek Matthews crying now, his carefully constructed image of confident masculinity crumbling in the face of this truth. Sarah Martinez had her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Throughout the auditorium, the social hierarchies that had seemed so important just an hour ago were dissolving in the face of shared grief and recognition. But Emma's greatest act of bravery, I said, my voice rising now, carrying to the back of the auditorium and beyond, was believing that her story could change things, that her death could prevent other deaths, that her pain could become purpose. I held up the journal one final time, then set it gently on the podium like an offering. Emma Rodriguez will never walk across this stage to receive her diploma, I said. She will never give her own graduation speech, never go to college, never become the artist she dreamed of being. But she has given us something more valuable than any of those things. She has given us the truth about ourselves, about our school, about what happens when we choose indifference over compassion. I looked out at the audience, at 300 people who would never be the same after this moment, who would carry Emma's story with them for the rest of their lives. The question now, I said, my voice quiet but carrying perfectly in the absolute silence, is what we're going to do with that truth. I could see parents looking at their children with new eyes, teachers reconsidering their priorities, students understanding for the first time that their actions and their inactions had consequences that rippled far beyond their own lives. Emma wanted to start a support group called the Sunflower Society. I said, today, I'm announcing that it will happen. Mrs. Rodriguez has agreed to fund it. Mrs. Chen has volunteered to supervise it. And Principal Henderson has promised to provide space and resources. I looked directly at Mrs. Henderson, who nodded slowly, understanding that this wasn't really a request. The entire community was watching now, and there was no way to refuse without looking heartless and incompetent. But more than that, I continued. Emma's story is going to be shared with every school in our district, every parent organization, every student council. Her death is going to mean something because we're going to make sure it means something. The silence that followed was different from all the others. It wasn't the silence of shock or grief or even shame. It was the silence of people making decisions, of consciences being awakened, of a community choosing to change. And in that silence, I knew that Emma Rodriguez had finally gotten the graduation speech she deserved. The silence stretched on for what felt like eternity, but I knew it was time to finish what I had started. The hardest truths had been told, Emma's story had been heard, and now came the most difficult part of all, finding a way forward that honored her memory, without drowning in the weight of our collective guilt. I know what you're thinking, I said, my voice softer now, more gentle than it had been during the revelations of the previous minutes. You're thinking about all the things you wish you had done differently, all the moments you wish you could take back. You're thinking that it's too late, that Emma is gone, and nothing can change that. I could see nods throughout the audience, the recognition of thoughts they were all having, the crushing weight of regret that threatened to paralyze rather than motivate. But Emma didn't share her story, so we could drown in guilt, I continued. She shared it so we could learn, so we could change. so we could make sure that no other student ever feels as invisible and worthless as she did. I picked up Emma's journal one last time, holding it carefully as I spoke. In her very first entry, freshman year, Emma wrote something that I think about every day now. She said, "I want to matter." Not in a big, famous way, but in the small ways that make life worth living. I want to be the kind of person who notices when someone is sad, who remembers people's names, who makes others feel less alone in the world. I could see Mrs. Rodriguez in the audience, Noma's mother, who had slipped in during my speech and was sitting in the back row, tears streaming down her face, but with something that looked like peace in her expression. She had trusted me with her daughter's story, and I hoped I had honored that trust. Emma Rodriguez was that kind of person, I said. She noticed. She remembered. She cared. And now it's our turn to be that kind of person too. I closed the journal and set it down, then looked out at the audience with clear eyes. When we leave here today, we're going to be different people than we were when we walked in. We're going to be people who have heard Emma's story, who understand the cost of indifference, who know that every person in every hallway, every cafeteria, every classroom has an inner life as complex and valuable as our own. I could see students looking at each other differently now, seeing classmates they had ignored or dismissed with new eyes. The social barriers that had seemed so important an hour ago were crumbling, replaced by something more fundamental, the recognition of shared humanity. "Derek Matthews," I said, looking directly at him. "Emma wrote that your smile in the hallway was one of the bright spots in her week. You have the power to be someone's bright spot every single day. Will you use it?" Derek nodded, his face serious and determined in a way I had never seen before. Around him, his friends were nodding too, understanding that their influence came with responsibility. "Sarah Martinez," I continued, "Emma was so excited when you asked her to help with decorations. She wanted to belong, to contribute, to be part of something bigger than herself. You have the power to include people, to make them feel valued. Will you use it?" Sarah looked up at me through her tears and nodded, and I could see in her face the beginning of a transformation that would ripple out through every organization she was part of, every group she led. "Mr. Peterson," I said, turning to the guidance counselor. "Emma needed someone to see her potential, to help her believe in herself, to guide her toward a future she could be excited about. You have the power to be that person for hundreds of students. Will you use it?" Mr. Peterson stood up slowly, his face grave but determined. "Yes," he said, and his voice carried clearly through the auditorium. "I will. We all will." One by one, other teachers began to stand. Mrs. Chen, who had always seen Emma's potential. Mrs. Patterson, who wished she had done more. Even Mrs. Henderson, the principal, rose from her seat with the weight of institutional responsibility on her shoulders. "This is Emma's graduation gift to all of us," I said as the standing ovation began again, but this time it was different. This time it was a commitment, a promise, a covenant with a girl who would never see the changes she had inspired, but whose influence would ripple through countless lives. She has taught us that kindness is not weakness, that sensitivity is not a flaw, that being different is not something to be ashamed of. She has taught us that every person matters, that every story deserves to be heard, that every life has value beyond measure. The applause was thunderous now, but it wasn't for me. It was for Emma, for the courage it had taken to share her story, for the change she had made possible even in death. As the applause finally died down and people began to take their seats, I realized that my prepared speech, the one about future dreams and past achievements, was completely forgotten. This was the speech I was meant to give, the one Emma had helped me write without either of us knowing it. "Class of 2024, I said, using the formal address for the first time in my entire speech. "We graduate today, not just with diplomas, but with a mission. We graduate with the responsibility to be better than we were, to see more clearly than we did, to love more bravely than we thought possible. I looked out at my classmates, these people who had shared for years of my life, who had ignored me and dismissed me and made me feel invisible, but who were looking at me now with respect and understanding, and something that might even be friendship. "We graduate in Emma's honor," I said, my voice carrying clearly to every corner of the auditorium. "And we will make sure that her story continues to change lives long after we've left these halls." I stepped back from the podium, Emma's journal in my hands, and looked out at 300 people who would never forget this moment. This speech, this girl who had found her voice by speaking for someone who could no longer speak for herself. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I could hear the applause following me, but more importantly, I could feel the change beginning. In the audience, students were already reaching out to classmates they had never spoken to before. Teachers were making mental notes about policies that needed to change. Parents were planning conversations with their children about kindness and inclusion. Emma Rodriguez had finally gotten her graduation speech, and it was more powerful than any of us could have imagined. In the end, we are all just stories waiting to be told, and Emma taught us that every story matters.